Hey guys, what's going on? In this short video, I will explain the similarities between WebLogic and Kubernetes architecture. This video will only benefit WebLogic administrators who are now trying to transition over to the wonderful world of Kubernetes administration. We will compare WebLogic and Kubernetes to understand the similarities and the differences. Let's get started. Let's first go over the similarities. We have three servers or nodes or machines, Node 1, Node 2, and Node 3. The first one hosts the WebLogic admin server. The other two are reserved for hosting managed servers. Each of those nodes has a node manager. The node manager in turn communicates with the admin server. Once we set up the node manager, we can create managed servers. What is the purpose of the managed servers? They host end user application. But in technical terms, what are these managed servers really? They are simply a JVM process. A JVM or Java virtual machine that is dedicated to your application. MS1 is on Node 2. MS2 is on Node 3. MS1 hosts application 1 and MS2 hosts application 2. These are completely different applications. What happens if Node 2 goes down? If Node 2 goes down, App 1 goes down. Users cannot access this application. If the application needs to be highly available, then you need to create a cluster with two managed instances, one on Node 2 and another on Node 3. Once we have a cluster set up, if either of the server Node 2 or Node 3 goes down, the other server will still be able to handle the application. All of these components are part of the WebLogic domain. This is what a basic WebLogic setup looks like. Let's take a look at the Kubernetes architecture now and see how it compares to WebLogic. Let's use the same example of three nodes, Node 1, Node 2, and Node 3. Node 1 is called the master node in Kubernetes speak. Node 2 and Node 3 are the worker nodes. The worker nodes communicate with the master node using kubelet. So a kubelet is similar to a node manager. The worker nodes host the pods. The pods can be compared to managed servers in WebLogic. We discussed earlier that the managed servers in WebLogic are simply Java virtual machines. Similarly, a pod can contain one or more containers. Usually only one container, but you can have more than one container. The containers in turn host the applications that are eventually accessed by the end users. Similar to WebLogic, we can have independent pods, or we can have pods that are part of a replica set. You can think of a replica set as being similar to a WebLogic cluster. This covers the similarities between WebLogic and Kubernetes architecture. Let's discuss the differences now. With WebLogic, we know that the admin server is one instance. Specifically, it's a JVM that performs the function of an admin server. However, in Kubernetes, the master node contains a number of components. These are also referred to as the control plane components. The first component is the API server. The API server is the heart of Kubernetes. Whenever you submit a request to Kubernetes, it is the API server that receives the request. The API server then decides which component to route your request to so that it can be successfully fulfilled. The next component is etcd, which is a key value store. Think of it as a database for Kubernetes. Note that the API server is the only component that can communicate with etcd. Next up is the Kubernetes Scheduler. The Kubernetes Scheduler manages scheduling of pods on the nodes. That is, if you request Kubernetes to spin up a new pod, the scheduler is the component that goes out and checks each node to see which one has sufficient capacity to host that pod. Finally, there is the controller manager. The controller manager is actually comprised of a number of different components. One example is a node controller, which is responsible for taking action when, say, a node goes down. Another example is a replication controller. If you set up a replica with, say, 2 pods, it is the job of the replication controller to ensure that the replica will always have 2 pods. So if one of the pods, say pod 3, goes down, the replication controller will make sure that it brings it back up. Alright, so now we've seen the components on the master node. Let's now discuss the components on the worker node. The only item we have not covered so far is kubeproxy. The kubeproxy allows communication from pods to services or from the outside world to the services. The way we expose the application to the outside world is by using services. The kubeproxy allows this communication between the services and the actual applications to take place. I should point out that the communication is not limited only to the outside world. Any of the pods within Kubernetes can access these services as well. There are other differences too. In WebLogic, we have the concept of a WebLogic domain. There is no equivalent to this in Kubernetes. Kubernetes does have a concept of namespace, but technically it's not the same as a WebLogic domain. At best, it is vaguely similar. In WebLogic, we also use JDBC data sources, but there is no such concept in Kubernetes. In Kubernetes, the application resides in the container, and the application is responsible for connecting to the database. All the data that is needed is stored in the database. In Kubernetes, the containers are short-lived. If the application that is hosted on these containers needs to persist any data, it is stored in the database. But what happens if the application copies a file to the local file system? Will the file persist when the container is destroyed and another one is spun up? The answer is no. If you want to persist a file on the file system, you will need to utilize persistent volumes. These volumes can be utilized by one pod or a number of pods. This concept of persistent volumes does not exist in WebLogic. That pretty much covers it. I hope this video provided you with a quick overview of Kubernetes by relating it to WebLogic. Thank you for watching.